Okay. Everybody can see my screen, thumbs up, good to go? All right, great. Okay, so just a quick introduction, just you know who's presenting. So I am Christine Eischen. I have been a school counselor since 2007 and moved to be an independent counselor in 2024 full time. I have had kind of a range of experience. I worked at Chicago Public Schools at a large IB high school and used to coordinate the Illinois IB College Fair. I then moved to the Lycée Français in Chicago, which is a French independent school in Chicago, where I created the IB counseling workshops for the IBO and built the college counseling program. And that's where I was really first introduced to international college admissions, having come from public school and really focused on US admissions. And it was really kind of a really overwhelming experience to learn international university options very quickly. Because of that experience, it really transformed my life experience and visiting schools around the world and what was available. And so, inspired by the families and students I worked with, I moved overseas, and I'm now based in Prague, the Czech Republic, since 2020. And I moved here with the International School of Prague, but had decided to work independently. I am an application reader for Northeastern University in Boston, which is where I met Melissa.
Thank you. You met me when you were my teacher for an IB counseling workshop, don't forget. I'm Malissa Takas. I'm currently based in Charlottesville, Virginia. I was a school-based counselor for almost 20 years, domestically at a therapeutic boarding school for 8 years, and then I moved abroad to Singapore. I was at Singapore American School, International School of Basel, and then back in Singapore for a year. So I think for me, coming from the domestic side of things, I really had sort of like a trial by fire experience, like moving into the school system, which, we understand most of us here this morning. I'm now an IEC. Most of us here this morning are IECs and domestic based in general. But I think for me, that was where I was thrown in the deep end, and especially moving to Switzerland, where 90% of my students were applying to non-US institutions. And so I think the volume of that experience is really transformative in making sure that you have a pretty deep understanding of the processes of different countries where our students maybe will, I think in this administration where we are politically in the US, we might see an increase in domestic US students applying to universities abroad. So that's really why we're here this morning, is that we are hoping to empower everyone to feel equipped to advise students on this type of mobility. If we see this increase, like we suspect we will, we want our colleagues to feel ready to go and move in that direction. Also a senior application reviewer for Northeastern for the past few years. I work with International ACAC on the mentor year program. I oversee that. And also am a huge tour coordinator in many different areas of my life. So seeing campuses and visits and visiting campuses around the world. So, all right. Thank you, Christine. I'll turn it back to you.
So why the Zoom, Melissa kind of mentioned we have just witnessed in a lot of our professional Facebook groups that there has been an increase in many public school or independent counselors asking questions about international universities and applications. And we just were answering those questions, and we just thought, why not offer a bit more support as counselors are trying to navigate some very different systems, and as well as being able to understand the bigger picture when you're supporting students that are looking to go abroad. The more that we empower and equip you all, the more that you can really support students and families that might be wanting to make some significant changes. So today we're going to start with some like big perspective, general information, and then some country specific information. And then again, leaving time for that questions and answers. And we will follow up with a survey to offer a bit more. Okay, and then we have a couple of polls that we wanted to just see if you can, when they pop up, just answer the polls, just to get an idea of where everyone is and what they're kind of coming to this presentation, where they're coming from and their knowledge base and country system. So I'm going to launch those polls. Do you see the polls? Yep, okay, good. So the poll should pop up on your screen. Sometimes you have to push kind of control or space.
Why don't I see them?
I don't see it.
No, okay, hold on. Oh, wait, now we go.
Got it.
Now, okay.
Ah.
So sometimes, yeah, people are voting. So sometimes if you have it full screen, if you push escape, the poll will pop up.
You can go to the three dots and it says polls, and then that'll pop up from there.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Let this person in. Okay, so can you see the results here? Well, we have a lot of beginners, which is great. I think hopefully this presentation will be helpful to kind of understand a bit of the big picture items when you're counseling students in regards to universities abroad. And then we can see the country systems, which really mirror some of the most popular destinations that we're going to talk about today. Okay. And if you put some things in the chat, we'll do our best to get to those answers. Mateo is on our call and he can answer some of those questions and we will try to answer. And if not, we will get back to you. So a couple of things again. So my part of the presentation, I'm going to talk about the bigger picture, some of the perspectives to just know about, even if you're just having these initial conversations with your families. And then Melissa's going to go through a bit more of the detailed information. So I think there's a couple of characteristics to keep in mind when you're working with students that are interested in exploring universities abroad. And so for those globally minded students, they are open-minded to experience a new culture, new people, be uncomfortable with themselves, with the experience to some degree, and stretch themselves. They like to explore, they like to travel. Many of the students that I think are first starting to explore this option come from a dual cultural background, might be multiple passport holders, or have family in a different location. There is, you'll kind of hear this quite a bit in our presentation. There is a bit more independence that's required of students. So these students should be independent or willing to work towards a bit more self-advocacy and independence. Also interested in arts, culture, and history. And this is a bit of a caveat. It's not always true, but I think a good guiding principle is they should have an idea of what they really want to study at university, and we are pretty clearly, and we're going to talk about that. So these from 2016 is a report on the most popular destinations for students in the US that are studying abroad. Now, many of the students we work with, I work with students in Europe that are applying in different countries. I have students applying all around the world, but we're going to kind of talk about US domestic students and places that they tend to go. These numbers have shifted. We just don't have new reports on it. And as Melissa mentioned when she was introducing herself, is we are tending to see and it'll be interesting to see what that looks like. And that also mirrored a lot of the poll that you all mentioned. So we're going to break down a couple of the big picture items in some, we'll go through these one by one, but some of the benefits of studying in an international university, and then some of the considerations that you need to know about. And hopefully these are talking points when you are speaking with families, and then gives you a bit of time to do that more in-depth research when you are getting into various country systems and applications. Okay, so one of the things to note, I think one of the number one factors I know that many families do look at is tuition. So, we are seeing such a rise in tuition in the United States, and outside of the United States, it can be much less expensive. So some tuition can range from 400 euros a credit hour, or even a school, to the UK can be 25,000 pounds, or around, making costs significantly less. We have an example at the bottom. So depending on the country system, it can depend on your passport. Various factors like that can depend on that when you get into the more details of a system. But for example, University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands will cost for a non-EU student 14,300 euros a year. And then when we look at a couple of examples of University of Iowa, University of Wisconsin-Madison, we're at over $30,000 a year. If a student has an EU passport, that price comes down to about 5,000 euros per year. And then we have other European systems where, like, for example, here in Prague in the Czech Republic, Charles University is their best university, and it's 6,600 approximately US dollars a year for all students, regardless. So this can be significantly, obviously, cost efficient. And then we linked on the slides, which you will receive, a link of the schools, and many abroad will take FAFSA loans. We don't know if that will change, as things change every day. The other benefit is it can save time. So many of the programs, the major is very focused. So that can be a benefit as well as a consideration. But the course of study is really focused from the start, and many degrees only take 3 years. So not only is that cost of saving with tuition, but it's cost saving with time, as well as that year less tuition as well. One of the things that I found, especially when I was the director of college counseling at the Lycée in Chicago, is a lot of times it can be a pathway to applying. So if a student maybe, say, didn't do so well in 9th or 10th grade, they really matured and got their transcript ready, and they're doing really great in, say, those APs or their IB classes in grade 11 and 12. That kind of red mark from 9 and 10, in abroad, applying abroad, they aren't going to look at the 9 through 12 profile in transcript as we do in the US. So those AP scores or their IB predicted grades are going to be what they're really looking at. And that can really help a student maybe reach their true academic goal at a really rigorous university that they might not reach in the US. Additionally, not all schools require ACT or SAT or testing, so that can be another pathway for some of our students. Additionally, their student is unique. They bring an experience to the classroom, they bring their perspective, they bring their culture, their diversity to campus, which I think many of our schools want and seek. And so that is where they can offer, and help add to the classrooms. I remember a UK university saying we love American students because they love to participate in class and raise their hands and bring conversation, where that might not be the case in some of the more traditional kind of European schools or classrooms. Additionally, travel and languages. So studying outside the US provides endless travel. So, jumping on a train and going to another country, which is their neighbor. For instance, I live in the Czech Republic. I can drive to Austria. I can drive to Italy in less than 3 hours, right? 5 hours to Italy. There's all these opportunities. The students can jump on a train. They can fly cheap airfare like Ryanair and get somewhere and just have this whole other rich, unique experience. Additionally, I've seen a lot of students wanting to, let's say, study in Spain because they want to really learn and practice that language to a level that they can reach, to work and live in Spanish as well. So there's additional opportunities outside the classroom. Additionally, we're seeing, a global portfolio and job market is rapidly changing, so that cultural understanding and experience can open new doors. It gives them an opportunity to have something to talk about and differentiate in their applications for future jobs, expands their network globally as well. And then there are lots of country systems that have a opportunity to stay and work in the country and have that work visa, and then also have a pathway to apply for dual citizenship with another country or residency. Okay, so now kind of getting into some of the considerations that we think you should know about it. Again, we talk about this focused course of study. Most university programs outside the United States are focused on that course of study. So if you're studying biology, you are studying biology. You look up, and Melissa will talk about some of the resources for, like, let's say the UK, you will see the modules that you're taking, and those modules are specific to that course of study. So when a student says, well, I'm kind of interested in like sciences and social science and global politics, but that's really tough. That doesn't really work. You are applying to that course of study is the number one conversation you should have. A caveat to that is there are lots of like dual majors, like business and biology, or Spanish and global politics. Like there are a lot of double majors, and there are more and more kind of interdisciplinary degrees that are that have been started, or liberal arts kind of degrees if a student wants to stay really broad. So I would say it's very focused or it's very broad. But it can also, one of the things I really like to do, even with my students staying in the US, is have them look at the majors abroad because it helps them understand what's available. And we have some links there sorry, for researching, again, those courses. Another thing, I just got back from a college tour in Scotland, and one of the things that we really asked a lot of questions about is that the teaching practices and assessment style. So many of the some of the systems within the Scotland and the UK may really heavily rely on one or two exams. So it's not a lot of like little projects, but maybe more focused on exams, as well as might have less teaching hours and more self-directed study and reading time. So it again reinforces that independent nature of a student with those fewer direct contact hours. Which leads me to the independence. So these students abroad, even in Canada, are adults, right? They are not minors, they are adults, and they are treated as such. Many schools do have support structure on campus for students. However, it is up to them to seek out those support structures. The students are expected to be managing their time, managing their responsibilities, managing their enrollment at school, managing that. So it is also expected in regards to how they kind of live their life also outside of the classroom. Many of the residence halls are single rooms, which some students really like, with shared kitchens. Many do not have dining halls, so students will be cooking for themselves or managing all of those aspects on their own. That's not always the case, but I would say it's the majority of the time is very much more independent, more individualized, less of that overall kind of support in regards to the living and dining situation. However, students then are able to be adults within the world outside of that campus as well. And there's lots of community involvement within the locations that they attend school. Another kind of general way to also know about entry requirements. So for example, yesterday, I had an email from a counselor friend who's in the US, who's helping a student who wants to explore UK universities, who has no APs and a 2.8 GPA. And unfortunately, that's really almost impossible. So one of the things this is an example from the research we've done on UK universities, which are the bit easiest, I would say, to start with, because it's pretty clear in regards to entry requirements in those course of study. Your safest bet is a student with APs. I would say 3 to 4 APs with scores of 4 to 5 is a general kind of guideline to see if a student is eligible to apply outside the United States. Some schools will consider an SAT or an ACT score, and that will enhance that profile, but it's not always required. Sometimes the subjects can be prerequisite subjects, like I was helping the student look at engineering courses, and it was that those APs needed to be in physics and in math. So sometimes you will need to look at those entry requirements. And we have an example on UCAS, which is like, I would say the easiest place to go to. Some schools like Bocconi in Italy or some in the Netherlands are adding in more additional kind of assessments. Those can be interviews, those can be tests, those can be additional kind of article to read. It's not always the case, but there can be additional information, like IE University has an interview plus a kind of a personality test that can be part of it. Sometimes the SAT or ACT can be subbed for those entrance tests, but sometimes not. But I would say most of it, that's another safe bet as well, depending on the score. Another consideration is accreditation. So for those majors that are like law or medicine or veterinarian, teachers, things like that, you always want to check to make sure that accreditation has a cross transfer to the US. There are some law programs that have a accreditation where a student can take the New York bar, but you also want to know to make sure that, you know, most of those law programs are going to be UK focused. So there will be missing knowledge in the US. So that just becomes a bit trickier. I have had students do vet programs abroad and come back to the United States. So it just becomes a little bit more research to make sure that that's possible. And then, you know, another general consideration is location. You know, the students can get homesick. Holidays like aren't the same. You know, Thanksgiving isn't celebrated here in the Czech Republic. So it's kind of can be weird my first year here. Languages, a bit of culture shock. So it's always, I always am, you know, when it's the first student to go abroad, I'm always just kind of just double circling back and checking in where the student is at. And I'm working with a transfer student from University of Colorado Boulder now, who every time I check with her, she's ready to go. She's ready for the adventure and experience. And I feel really grateful to be able to help her hopefully take that step. And then I think this is my last slide or getting close to it. A counselor tip is there can be a lot of complexity. So I hope even just that part didn't overwhelm you. It's hopefully good talking points for you to consider, but also like we created this because don't be afraid to ask for help, like use those Facebook groups, build a connection and network of international university counselors that are experienced. I only learned this work by building a network of people that helped me. Like it would have taken me 3 times as long and it was overwhelming. And I had so many mentors along the way that were there as I learned this work. So additionally, you know, a lot of times you know, I've worked with a US domestic-based counselor and they're like, I don't know this piece, and you can refer to another experienced international counselor if you don't feel comfortable to jump into this place, and you know, work collaboratively with that counselor on the international piece. Okay, so let's dig into some of the popular destinations, and I'm going to pass it over to Melissa.
Thank you. You can go to the next slide. So I'm going to get into hopefully not too many overwhelming logistical and entry requirement considerations for a couple of really popular destinations that hopefully if you're just getting started with these topics, we can just give you some basic information to start to guide when students and families come to you and say, I want to leave the US. And I found in my experience, families will just throw out random countries that are just really lovely. Like, I want to live in Switzerland. I hear that Italy is nice. And you can sometimes get so far down into this rabbit hole of students who might not have the qualifications or might not even be equipped to study in these countries. And so we don't want anybody to feel like they, you know, waste more time than is necessary on that kind of process. So a couple of really positive things about countries, places studying abroad. There are streamlined application processes, not for all countries, but I know domestic-based counselors, we get very used to the common application, even though it's not feeling very common anymore or centralized sometimes. But the UCAS system, for example, some provinces in Canada, but then often we go out from there to have like a one for one type application process. We do have, and we'll show examples later on, but international curricula are recognized. So APs, IBs, or APs, IB diploma. We might see for students who do not have APs or IBs, which we know a lot of schools do not offer anymore. We see the like translation. So we'll have tariff points for the UK or something like this. And again, we'll show you examples of this. Some negative aspects of this process maybe is that there are sometimes some complex documentation pieces, visa processes. There are so many different timelines. Like sometimes it can feel a little overwhelming to think of all the different deadlines, and it's not as straightforward as what we see in the US all the time. And then the admission criteria, as Christine said, some courses and some countries require things that students just will not have. For example, being based in Switzerland, a lot of my students and families who did not have, necessarily UK or Euro-based passports and wanted to stay in Switzerland, they were not going to meet the language requirement. So to be fluent in Swiss German or French or Italian, whatever it was, that was just like a barrier. So sometimes the barriers are language speaking issues, and sometimes the barriers are academic requirements. You can go to the next slide. So one of the we're kind of going from it's popular, not most popular to least popular, but we often see students who are like, let's just go to Canada. I have no idea what is about to happen with any sort of border situation with Canada. I don't think any of us do, but let's hope that the border stays open. I know Canada was trying to cut back a bit on their visas available for students coming internationally to study. But in general, the cost is quite effective. We see this a lot. I was seeing this a lot as I was advising students around the world. It still is an extremely cost-effective destination. And so you might see 20 to 30,000 Canadian dollars for the entire year for study. You do semi need to know what you want to study. We say it's kind of like a hybrid. It's like kind of middle ground. You can declare usually 2 or 3 different majors on the applications for Canada. And for example, if they say, well, you're not qualified to study engineering, but here's a pathway. You can come to UBC and have kind of we won't call it a foundation year, and if you earn these grades, you can then transfer into engineering. So I think they do provide a bit of a safety net when they're looking at your qualifications and seeing what you want to study, and did what you study and prepare for match what you want to study in university. Toronto, UBC, McGill are 3 major international destinations that we see students pursuing in Canada. Websites we'll be sharing with you later. And there are a few universities in Canada on the Common Application. I think globally, I counted about 60 international schools on the Common App right now. Christine, what am I forgetting about Canada? I feel like I'm forgetting something really obvious. I don't know, course of study. No. Oh, you're muted.
I would say that the application process is a bit more straightforward. It's
Okay.
looking up like test scores, depending on the province too. I would say Quebec is a bit different than like Ontario. Some schools are on the Common App, like we have those listed there, but it can be a bit more straightforward where you're just uploading.
I know what I was going to say. Sometimes they do not reply before May 1st. So you might often have students who are applying to multiple countries or US and Canada, and they might have to hold their spot at their US school, and they might not hear back from their Canadian school until May, June. And that's been typical in my career. Okay, we can go to the next slide. All right, the UK. This is a big one. I think we will probably see this as being, I don't know, the next probably biggest increase in where our students are saying, I want to check out the UK. So Scotland, parts of Ireland as well. The UCAS is a centralized application hub. This is where students, one nuanced thing to consider is students submit their application to the UCAS, for only up to 5 programs. And then their reference, so whether they're applying independently or they're applying through their school, UCAS is just a system that needs to be navigated, and you'll learn it pretty quickly if you haven't already utilized it. But you cannot apply through UCAS to 5 schools and then through Common App to other schools. So you really just want to, when you're advising, in particular for the UK, really steer your students to choosing 5 courses or universities. So you can have multiple courses within one university. The cost is, again, fairly cost effective. It's typically 3 years. There are some really nice things for me in advising students through this process is that this is sometimes a space available basis, meaning you might apply through the UCAS and some schools or courses respond with a conditional or unconditional offer within a few days. And then, of course, we have some of the more, obviously popular competitive programs that you might not hear back from until March or April. But once you apply to your 5 schools, your letter of reference, you submit to the UCAS, and then your referee has to upload their letter of reference and then submit on your behalf. So you are relying on other people to submit your application for you. Did your screen just go dark, or is it just me? I have the slides. I can keep talking.
It went dark for me too.
Me too.
Yeah.
Here. Thank you, tech genius. Okay. I think, did I cover everything on the slide before? No, can you? Okay, perfect. So course of study, I think one of the things we'll look at together quickly this morning is just entry requirements. So when we look at entry requirements, you do have to be prepared to study what you want to study. It's not an undecided thing. This is the most important critical thing I think to note for the UK is that you can't just be an undecided student just messing around for a year like we do in the US. So that's massive. When you're advising students who don't know what they want to do, we'll talk about foundation year programs, but when you have a student who is wholly undecided, it's not going to work for like the proper UK UCAS system. It's just not. They can have an idea, but they're going to have to declare what they want to study and why and how they've prepared to do so. Oxford, Cambridge, med school, dentistry, veterinary, they have this very early deadline. It's not negotiable. It's October 15th. So, in the US, we have a handful of October 15th deadlines, but in the UK, this is a very early, hard deadline. And there are sometimes with these schools and the courses, they have to have either exams before they apply to these schools and programs or exams and assessments after they apply. So if you have students who you think qualified for, interested in applying to UK options that are the October 15th deadlines, I mean, we start advising those students in like June and July before these deadlines. They need that much time to prepare. If your student says, I want to be a doctor and I'm going to go do that in the UK, it is highly competitive. You have to take exams and it's a whole timeline. So feel free to reach out to any of us if you have somebody who you think might be qualified and you want to learn this piece. We're not going to obviously belabor this today. But yeah, we can move on to the next slide. I think I covered most of this stuff before, but the personal statement is up to 4,000 characters. It's about 550 to 650 words. It's very straightforward. Why do I want to study this thing? What did I do to prepare? And then why do I want to study in the UK? It is not about extracurriculars, leadership, nothing like that. So if you have STAR students, high-flying profiles, that can be transferable to the UK and being a competitive UK applicant. But again, this is a very pointy student. They know what they want to do, they know what they want to study, and they've prepared. So it is highly, the people who are reading their applications, it's highly professional. These are professors. These are not application readers like like us. So it's really important for them to be talking the talk and the lingo and really speaking to, if you want to be an engineer, speaking to people who are engineers and teaching engineering. If we move on to the next slide, I know that it's a little bit blurry, but this is just an example of helping you understand that the university websites do a pretty good job of spelling out exactly what the entry requirements will be. So this is the University of St. Andrews. It's a Bachelor of English, pretty straightforward. But these are like kind of two different screenshots. So they will say, we look for grades of A or B in your high school record, 3 AP subjects with a score of 4+. Examples of prerequisite knowledge, evidence of top grades, AP scores of 5 on subject tests. So if you're an IB student, HL, your higher level courses of a 6, they will get pretty specific sometimes. So if you're helping a student create a list and form a list, definitely rely on the school course websites themselves. I think they're highly instructional. So this is another thing too, it's not a guessing game. It's not a holistic. So if you have a family that's like, well, maybe we'll just throw in an application to Oxford. You can go and look at the actual entry requirements and say, well, you don't meet these requirements. So if you don't meet them, you will be automatically rejected. The entry requirements are not a guarantee of admission. They're just simply a suggested threshold. So depending on the applicant pool that year for any of these programs, again, even if your student meets the entry requirements, they're still being evaluated. So please make sure within those five UCAS choices that your students do have like a backup school. They do have a safety idea. They have a school where they are going to exceed the entry requirements. I would highly recommend that. Foundation year programs, these vary, whether that's a talent or project, a talent-based type evaluation, for example, artists, designers, architect, this sort of thing. And then there's also the foundation program that is more for English speaking skills, giving students a foundation who have not had English as their mode of instruction. So it would require then that you would be at the university for 4 years. It does somewhat give you a bit of an entry into these schools. So if you have students who are falling below the requirements, foundation programs are good to look into, but you just want to be sure that it's not, if your student has been in an English speaking school and mode of teaching for their whole career, that it is not exactly, centered on the English speaking piece. But yeah, foundation year programs, we advise students all the time who need to develop portfolios or they're missing requirements or that sort of thing. Okay, really quickly about the Netherlands. When I was in Switzerland, I saw a bit of an increase in applications to Dutch schools. What we need to know here is, again, a very cost-affordable, a set of cost-affordable options. Courses are focused, they're time restricted, so 3 to 4 years. We'll talk about the variety of options on the next slide, but you can have up to 4 applications at a time through StudyLink. So StudyLink is the central hub, it's like a clearinghouse, and then from your application in StudyLink for up to 4 options at a time, you then go to the individual universities to do further applications, further submissions. And then if, for example, you get rejected or denied from any one of your original 4, you can remove that from StudyLink and put in another option later. So how we advise students seeking opportunities in the Netherlands is that we would ask them to apply to perhaps 2 or 3 fairly competitive programs first, or their first choices. If they get into those first options, maybe they don't need that 4th one, or if they haven't been successful, again, it's all time sensitive based on deadlines. If they haven't been successful, they can replace something that they've been rejected from. Numerous fixes are programs that have limited seats. So it's really important for something like psychology comes to mind, which we wouldn't necessarily think about that for like the US. Like a student who wants to study psychology in the US or Canada or even the UK will have millions of options. But something like the numerous fixes programs in the Netherlands, and they can change and vary from year to year. You can only apply to 2 of these. They are, again, highly competitive. They involve assessments, interviews, further follow-up, and you don't necessarily find out about those soon in the process versus those programs that have, more unlimited seats. You'll find out sooner after you apply. And we encourage students who are looking at the Netherlands roughly to be applying in October, November, the same as we would. And deadlines go later in the Netherlands, but students who are pretty serious about the Netherlands, I think that's just something to keep in mind for the deadlines. Is there anything else I forgot about Netherlands?
Yeah, I would just
Christine?
like to note that what we've seen is because there's been an influx to the Netherlands that it's very crowded. And what I've seen from my students, the first year is very hard. They make it hard
Yeah,
almost on purpose, and there's various drop dates to
yeah,
withdraw. So it's a student needs to know the first year you're going to work your butt off, and then it kind of
mhm,
tailors down. And the students have told me even at those deadlines, it starts to like lighten up the load a
yeah,
bit. It is pretty intense. There is also a housing issue in the Netherlands. So students have to be like very, very, very proactive in getting and securing housing. Is if they're accepted and they're going to attend, they should immediately start looking for housing. And the
yeah.
universities will help and provide some information, but it's really what I've been told is share that to use your networks and various groups and things like that.
Yeah. I think we won't take too much time for the next slide, if you want to move to that. I mean, these are different types of systems. So there are 3 different types of university classifications in the Netherlands. Much like we see research universities or liberal arts schools, these types of classifications in the US. I think for me, this was one of the hardest things to learn as I did work with a lot of students applying to the Netherlands. I had to do a lot of studying on the differences between research versus honors college versus University of Applied Science. And it's not that it's unlearnable. I think when we share the resource, I think if you start to advise students applying and looking at the Netherlands, I think you'll catch on pretty quickly through the resources. But I will say, this was one of the, not all what I want to say here is not all majors are offered in all schools. So some schools and some, places are just better for other types of study, for certain types of study than others. But I don't want to belabor this. We can move on. We have like 2 more slides left, so hang in there, everybody. We're almost done. We just have 2 slides on Europe in general. This is where we could spend 3 more hours talking about the other, destinations. So Spain, Italy, Switzerland, Germany. We'll provide this in the resources we send. One of the biggest limitations I've found is the mode of teaching. So there are not going to be hundreds and hundreds of options in kind of Europe, greater Europe, where students who do not speak fluent Swiss German or fluent Italian can go. So please understand that these options will be limited, and we will share more resources on these. Christine, say a little bit more about Europe, or we can go to the popular destinations. I just want to make sure I'm covering this without going too fast.
Yeah, no, I think that there's, I would say business, 100%, there's a bazillion business
Yeah.
options. Social sciences, very popular. There's some options, like, so Mateo is studying his PhD at University of Navarra. They have some options. There are options out there. It takes a little bit more, legwork to know. And then, yes, in some countries, like, people know that Germany is very, inexpensive. However, there aren't a lot of undergraduate English taught options, so it takes a little bit of legwork. We do have 2 links below. One, if you have IB students, the IB country recognition policies, and then we have the the International ACAC or NACAC guides for each country system to help you navigate that a little bit more.
And the other thing too is that your families might be knowledgeable about the American universities abroad, which we have on our resource sheet. But Bard Berlin, American University Paris, Franklin Switzerland, in my career, when I was working domestically, those were kind of the main schools, or like University of Edinburgh or something like this, where kind of families had a limited understanding of these types of, and on this slide too, like popular European universities, you might hear your families being who are familiar with these, or you might be familiar with these. So I think these, along with some others that we will include in the resource, and then the next slide as well, which is our last official slide. Some of you might hear of these, and these might continue to grow, right? Like Emerson has kind of these global campuses, or Suffolk University. I know like students, where else? Like, oh, Sciences Po, Columbia. Families might begin to hear, and we might, as professionals, might begin to hear more and more about these types of like combined opportunities, joint programs, and maybe those will grow. Obviously it's highly unpredictable. But these are a couple of options that you might be familiar with too. These dual programs where you might spend your first year, or another year or two abroad. I know, for example, Northeastern, even though I read apps for Northeastern, I don't make decisions. I'm not on the admissions team, but a lot of my students this year, and maybe you have seen this too in your work, a lot of my students have received those NUN offers. I have a student, the London Scholars. So we might see an increase in these types of offers. And then last but not least, and then we're just going to open up to Q&A. We're keeping an eye on time. Thank you for your patience. This is a lot to get through, especially when you're on a 6-hour jet lag situation like myself. We will be sharing this. It's a bunch of links. They will be hyperlinked. We just have put them into sort of popular categories in the most basic advising resources. General guidance in that top left corner, some popular universities, university destinations. We did not cover today Australia and Japan. We sometimes have students asking about these. Again, fairly limited options and interesting considerations. Limited options, I'm sorry, in Japan for English speaking courses. By limited, I mean probably fewer than 15 or 20 max. And then Australia, of course, English isn't the issue. It's just their year starts in February officially. It's very far away. The cost isn't as cost effective when it's all said and done. And so it's not that Australia isn't a wonderful study destination. It's just that it's kind of, it's an interesting consideration for people who are kind of living so far from Australia. In other words, I haven't had a lot of students take me up on the offer. Even though it sounds like a fun idea when you're 17, like, let me go study in Australia. But I can count on maybe 1 or 2 fingers my students who have actually gone through with it. So we will be sharing this with you. It will have hyperlinks. It's just kind of a place to get started. And I will stop talking now. And we can, I guess, stop recording as well. And then if anybody has any questions.